I recently made a video on whether or not, assuming you want to be traditionally published, you should have an agent. My conclusion was that yes, you do want an agent for a whole host of reasons. If you want to learn more about what a good agent provides, check out that other video, which I've handily linked in the upper right corner. This video assumes that you do want an agent and answers the question, how do I go about getting one? I'm going to be doing that by sharing 8 steps from gathering a list of agents to querying to having a phone call with a prospective agent and finally signing the agency agreement. So stick around. If you're new to the channel, I'm Brad Beaulieu and I'm a full-time fantasy and science fiction author with a dozen novels, tons of short stories, and 20 plus years of experience in the field of writing. I started a novel approach to share some of the hard-earned lessons I've learned about writing, editing, publishing, and the business of writing. If any of that sounds up your alley, be sure to subscribe, and if you find this video useful, I hope you'll like, share, and maybe even buy me a coffee on ko-fi.com. Link in the description below. Okay, before we dive in, let me start with a word of caution. The steps I'm outlining below may seem like a lot, and there's a good amount of work to do, no doubt, before you query a single agent, but it's important to take your time, organize yourself, and to put your best foot forward when reaching out to agents. Why? Because they're busy people and they're in high demand, and you're only going to have this one chance on this book to make your impression and to hopefully have them request a partial or full manuscript and perhaps take you on. So you just want to take your time and make sure you're approaching this the right way. Okay, let's move on to step number 1. The first thing you want to do is to develop a list of agents. How do you find them? Through word of mouth. Talk to other writers. Ask them who their agents are and if they like them. Ask authors for their list of top agents. Maybe they've been tracking them for a while and can share that with you. Get more than one list from multiple authors if possible and compare them, and you'll start to see some commonalities. Also, research via trade outlets and magazines. A common one is Publishers Marketplace. This is Publishers Marketplace. It is a paid venue, so you can see some of the pitch information out front here, and if you want to become a member, you can do so. I'll touch on that in 1 second. But it will give you things like news in the publishing field via Publisher's Lunch. You can look up deals and who made them and who they went to and get a rough idea for how much. Via these deals, you can see what books have been sold, what's in the news, what's buzzworthy, that type of thing. And if you want to join, you can click Become a Member, and you can see that it's $25 a month, but you can get a discount for paying 6 months or 12 months ahead. And you may want to invest in that so you can develop your list of agents that you can use over time and even multiple books perhaps. There's a free resource in Query Tracker, and I'll put all these links in the description below so you can find them later. But again, this is a free resource and it tracks different agents, the deals they've made through submissions from other members. So let me just give you an example. If I go to agents, search for agents, I know Matt Bialer is an agent. We can look him up, scroll down and we see him here. We can click on him and we see some of his basic information, which agency he belongs to, address, emails. We can see comments about different submissions that have been sent in. Again, this is focused solely on queries, and so that's what these comments are talking about. We can look at reports about how many have been sent in, how many queries, how many partials have been requested, how many fulls. Now, this is incomplete data, of course. It's only from self-reporting authors who have sent stuff in, but it gives you some sense of what this agent is like. So Query Tracker may be a good resource for you. You can also look at the Association of American Literary Agents. This is a group that agents join and belong to, and it lists reputable agents across America. There may be similar, and probably is, similar organizations in the UK and other countries. I don't know which ones those are. You could do some research, but you can probably find a website that lists good reputable agents and has some of their information as well. And so, for example, you can click on Find an Agent, and you can see all the agents that are here. You can do searches and do some detailed searches on agents you're becoming aware of. You can also look to genre-specific magazines. I specialize in science fiction and fantasy, and Locus Magazine is one of the trade magazines, probably the most well-known, and it covers science fiction and fantasy and horror, and it has information about who's making sales, which agents to which publishers. And I can find that by going to News Publishing, and they have a monthly roundup. If I click on this People and Publishing Roundup, April 2025, it shows things like milestones, awards, and then books sold. So it says who sold it, to which publisher, via which agency. As you look at this kind of information on a weekly/monthly basis, you can start notating who's making sales, which agencies are active in the field. Now again, this is sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. There are going to be similar outlets for mysteries, romance, thrillers, that sort of thing. So you can look those up and get more detailed information that's specific to your genre. You can also meet agents in person at conventions or conferences. Some of these will give you a chance to pitch directly to the agent. Those are usually conferences. But even if you don't pitch, you can meet them and get a sense of what they're like. Each genre, again, has conferences dedicated to it. Some are more generic. Some of my favorites are Worldcon, World Fantasy, Gen Con, and for conferences, the Pikes Peak Writers Conference. Let me show you those very quickly. Here's the website for Worldcon, the World Science Fiction Convention, which covers fantasy and a bit of horror as well. And this is held yearly in different cities each year, and so you can get information on where it is and how to attend, that sort of thing. World Fantasy is my favorite convention. It says World Fantasy, but again, it does cover science fiction as well. And this one is a bit smaller than Worldcon, and so it's a bit more intimate. I have found it to be kind of an industry getaway, and so agents and editors are a bit more relaxed. It's a bit easier to talk to them at that particular convention. Gen Con is a gaming convention that for many years has had a writing track called the Writers Symposium. Unlike, say, Worldcon and World Fantasy, which talk about the field in general and not, frankly, a lot about the craft, about learning writing, Writers Symposium at Gen Con is pretty focused on the craft and also the business of writing and gaming and tie-ins and that sort of thing. And so if you are in the learning process and networking process and or are a gamer, you might want to go and get your feet wet at something like this. And then Pikes Peak Writers Conference covers a wide variety of genres, and it is a conference. It's very focused on the craft of writing and learning how to write better, and also getting publishers and agents to the conference so you can potentially do pitch sessions with them, which I have done in the past. And so this is a great one to learn and network. It doesn't have quite as many agents in each of those fields: romance, thriller, mystery, horror, science fiction, fantasy, but it will have some from each of those different genres. And so you can at least meet a few editors and agents in those different genres who specialize in them. And so it's a worthwhile conference to go to in my experience. But there are plenty of others. You can look for conferences specifically that are a bit more tailored, less fanish, and more on the business and craft of writing. And then based on your initial research, start listing the agents that you find in a spreadsheet. Why a spreadsheet? Because you're going to want to track a lot more than just their name. So as you come across new names, for example, in Publishers Marketplace or Locus or whatever trade magazine you're following, put them in your spreadsheet. And then add various sheets and columns to track things like the genres they represent. Add specific authors they represent to get a sense of their stable and their interests. Include contact information and their agency website. Note whether they're currently open to submissions. Let me show you my example. This is from the early 2000s when I was active in searching for an agent. But basically, I started with listing agent sales. So I would go through Locus at the time and look at who was selling, and then I would just jot it down in here. So I would put the name of the agent and what sales they made and when they made extra ones, additional ones, I would just put it in a new column. And so here, for example, Eleanor Wood had sold quite a few books. And so those are 3 examples of sales in some time period I was tracking back then. And then as you move along, you'll develop your agent list. And so what I did was put the agent, their agency, who they represented perhaps, and then the number of appearances I found in Locus. Sold books, in other words. And so Russell Galen, my current agent, was selling a ton back then, and he still is. Ralph Vicinanza, Joshua Bilmes, et cetera, et cetera. So whoever you're tracking, just notate how many times they're selling, and you're just starting to collect more and more information to get a sense of who they are, how well they're selling, the types of people they're selling. You're getting a good idea of the field of agents out there and Also probably picking up on who you might like to reach out to with your project. Then start researching the agents. Go to their websites, check out their online presence, look for reviews, look at their track record of sales, reach out to authors they represent and ask them if they think the agent is worth pursuing, or at least get their impressions of the agent. Essentially, make sure they're the kind of agent you'd like to work with over the next 10 plus years, because that's what we're talking about here. You're looking for a long-term business relationship. Try to find out if they're a hands-on editorial style agent or more focused on the business side of things. See how successful they've been in your primary genres. Look into their ability to make foreign sales, because that can be a large part of your income as a writer. Importantly, note whether they allow simultaneous submissions. The unwritten rule has always been that publishers generally don't accept simultaneous submissions. In other words, if you're submitting to one publisher, you can't submit to others until they've given you an answer. It's generally been accepted by agents that they will accept simultaneous submissions. In other words, you can send queries to multiple agents at the same time, but some will say specifically that they don't allow simultaneous submissions, and so you should take note of that and follow their rules. And by the way, this particular step, researching and vetting the agent, is precisely what they're going to be doing with you and your name if they like what they see in your material. It's important to remember that your online presence is going to be taken into account by an agent because they're looking for a long-term business relationship too. I won't get into detail at this point on how to act online, but be professional, be mindful of your online presence, essentially be a good human being. Now, let me pause here and talk about scammers. You want to be very careful and do your homework. I mentioned in that previous video about agenting that there are 4 kinds of agents: wannabes, has-beens, scammers, and good effective agents. Wannabes and has-beens are relatively easy to identify with their time in the market and their track record of sales. Scammers are a bit more difficult to suss out, but the biggest indicator will be if they charge you to read your manuscript or want money for any other reason. The general rule in publishing is money flows toward the author, not away from them. So if they're asking for money for any reason, you're likely looking at a scam or possibly a vanity press of some sort. The best way to identify good, effective agents, someone you'd want to work with long-term, is by seeing them selling consistently on a month-by-month, perhaps year-by-year basis. As I mentioned, you'll be looking at their website. So here's an example of the Donald Moss Literary Agency, and I've met Don a number of times. In fact, at Pikes Peak Writers Conference, we talked a number of times there, and we can see things like their homepage, of course, news. If the agency is keeping up on their sales on their webpage, that's a good sign. It shows they care about that and they have someone dedicated to it. It usually indicates a somewhat larger agency. You'll see their list of agents inside of that agency as well. They will always have a submissions page of some sort. So if we click on that, it will just tell you what they're looking for submissions, how you should submit to them, and whether or not they are currently accepting submissions, whether or not they accept simultaneous submissions, that sort of thing. They will sometimes give you an idea of how long a response will take, but not always. Subsidiary rates are important. Selling to foreign countries, again, can be a huge part of your income, and so understanding how they handle that is really important. You may ask that on the phone call before signing with them, but you should do your homework up front and just try to get a sense of how good they are, how big is their presence outside of the US, or if you're in the UK, outside of the UK. We can see some of their clients broken down by genre. And again, the better agencies will stay on top of this type of thing and update it as they get new clients. We can see what books they've sold, what their authors have sold. Here's an interesting one for Don Moss in particular. He has some books on writing, which I highly recommend. I have talked in my previous videos about writing the breakout novel. He has a workbook that goes along with that. And I was also at Pikes Peak and he was just trying to flesh out the fire in fiction. And so he hadn't written this yet, but I attended a seminar where he was talking about the high-level concepts and passing along some information. And I found this quite interesting as well. But let me swing back to doing your research and trying to find out if they're scammers or not. If you see anything on here that indicates that they're looking for money to read your manuscript, stay away. Look elsewhere. There are sites online that will track this kind of thing. Predators and Editors is one of those places. However, they are currently going through a revamp, and so the website is a bit defunct at this point, or at least it's not being updated. They do have a Facebook page, but that's not being updated on a regular basis at this point either, so just keep an eye on it, and that may be a useful resource in the future. When in doubt, stick to the agents with proven track records. And then, based on all that research, start refining your list. You may drop some agents entirely from consideration based on what you find, if they don't quite match you in terms of genre, for example. Of the ones that remain, order them into top tier, mid tier, and low tier. And this is not a value judgment on your part, but rather an evaluation of how good a fit they are for you, your material, and your long-term career. Okay, that was a really long step one, but it's important to gather all that information for the next step so you know you'll be ending up with someone that you can work with long term. Step number 2 is prepare your query letter. A query letter has 4 basic parts: the salutation, the opening, the hook, describing the beginning, middle, and end, and then a call to action. In order to figure out what your query letter is going to look like, you should research query letters and especially pay attention to ones that are written for your genre. So here's an example of a Google search for sample query letter. Let's take a look at this 5 agent-approved query letter examples. And so just scrolling down through here, we have a science fiction query letter, and they're all going to hit the same notes that I mentioned. So here's the open, and it begins immediately with, I am writing to seek representation for my 120,000 word science fiction novel, Elysium Dying. This implies that that book is complete, it's done, it's ready to submit, and that's important to let them know. You don't want to give them the impression that you're still working on it or you're just sending out feelers, that sort of thing. It also says what genre it's in immediately, and then that same first paragraph goes into the hook and starts talking about what this novel is about. So it concerns a not so distant future which has been ravaged not only by mass infertility, but also an alien invasion that threatens to wipe out all existing life. So good hook gets the agent to read on. And then another very common element is to start comparing your novel to other books that have been successful. Generally speaking, you don't want to compare it to the best sellers in the genre unless it's a good match. That's the instinct, right? To compare yourself to a Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings or whatever, or to John Grisham or Stephen King or what have you. But find things that are perhaps more recent so they know how to categorize your book. They can start thinking about how they might sell it. They can start thinking about which publishers might be a good match for it. Then these next few paragraphs are the beginning, middle, and end of that book. Now, this is a really hard thing to do for authors typically, breaking down a 100,000 word novel into just a few paragraphs. It is made much easier by starting with a kernel of an idea and expanding from that. And I've talked about that in my early videos on mastering fiction, my brainstorming video and the plotting video in particular. I mentioned in those videos Randy Ingermanson's snowflake plotting method, which you can search for and find easily, but I have it right here as well. And the idea is to take a single idea, like a 1-sentence idea, and expand that into 1 paragraph, 3 to 5 sentences. And then take each sentence and expand that into its own paragraph, so you now have a page. And then expanding each paragraph so you have a page each. And now you have like 3 to 5 pages, a good outline for your novel. And so my point here is that you can use those early brainstorming sessions. That one-liner would be your hook in that first paragraph. And the 3 paragraphs, 3 to 5 paragraphs, would be the central part of your query letter. Now, obviously, that's during the brainstorming phase, and things are going to change a lot by the time you get to the submission phase for looking for an agent or an editor. You'll have to modify that stuff quite a bit, massage it, but at least you have a starting point, instead of trying to boil down a full novel into a couple of paragraphs. But let me go back to the query letters. So that was science fiction. There's a nonfiction query letter in here. This one is interesting. With nonfiction especially, you want to indicate why you are an expert in this field. What do you bring to the table? Why would people want to read that book from you? You should be an expert of some sort in that area. So in the opening, for example, they talk about being a university undergraduate and how that affected their idea for this novel. And then down below, They say, beyond my personal experience using the principles of priming, I have a PhD in behavioral psychology from Marlow University, where I, etc., etc. So they're providing to the agent their bona fides, and that's important in this kind of query letter. It would be important and valuable as well in, say, a science fiction novel where you have relevant experience in that field. I'll skip the memoir query letter, but you can certainly look at this or other query letters too. There's one for a thriller that's specific to it. So here again, I am seeking representation for my 100,000 word psychological thriller. So it's telling the agent that this is complete and ready to go. And then the hook is broken out into the next paragraph. This one talks about promoting to their own fans. If you have a large built-in audience of some kind, you should notate that. They would want to be aware of that. And then let me jump down to the romance query letter. So again, I'm seeking representation for my completed romance novel, Fire and Silk. This one mentions that it's a sequel to a previous novel, which was shortlisted. If you have any awards that are relevant, you should absolutely throw that into your query letter as well. Here's a very interesting paragraph. Early readers have noted something about the book, and best-selling author Tamara Jones has described my current draft as unexpectedly gripping and achingly sensual. There's kind of a built-in recommendation from another author, a best-selling author, that may help to sell this to a publisher, and so the agent will want to know that. Let me jump back quickly to the science fiction pitch. If possible, as you're comparing your book to others, if you can compare it to one of the agent's other authors, that might help them to understand where this thing fits. So the novel's first contact arc is similar to your client Russell Fleming's approach in The Blue Abyss. So again, you're just trying to give the agent a sense of what this thing is like, and by referencing one of their own authors that they represent, they'll have a very good idea of what yours is like. That's a leaping off point for them. And then jumping back to that last one, all of these are going to end with some kind of call to action. Thank you very much for your consideration, Mrs. Montgomery. I look forward to hearing from you. That's all you really need. They know you're looking for an answer about representation, but just put that in there so you understand that you're eager to talk further, and again, you're putting your best foot forward. And then end cordially. Okay, step number 3 is to start submitting those queries. You got your query letter ready, and you may customize them for each agent you're going to send to, and you also have your list of agents in your spreadsheet that you've developed over time. But when you send out, you're only going to want to send to a certain number at a time. I mentioned those top tier, mid tier, lower tier, that sort of thing. So send to 3 to 5 agents at a time, definitely no more than 10. Why? Because the feedback you get from those replies from those agents may help you course correct for the next batch. So as you start getting answers, note each submission in your spreadsheet, how they answered, if they asked for a partial or not, or a flat rejection. And then wait for others and track the replies in that first round. And then monitor non-responses over time. Give them, 8 weeks, 3 months max. And if you don't hear anything by then, you might send a follow-up and ask them if they've had a chance to look at it very nicely. I might do that 2 times for any given agent, especially my top tier agents. And after that, if I don't hear back, I just consider it a rejection, an implied rejection. I notate that and I move on. It's important to note that agents are looking for a diverse stable of clients. Editors are too. They want to cover a wide range of reader tastes to have a greater chance of having a bestseller. So keep in mind, a no or a non-response shouldn't be taken personally. It may just be that they already have someone like you in their stable and may decline to take you on that basis alone. If you get no requests for partials or fulls, that tells you something. You need to, at that point, look closely at your query letter and make adjustments because it's not grabbing them. They haven't even looked at your material yet, right? So it's the query letter's problem. You have to address that before you go any further. Ask other authors, you should have done this in the beginning too, but ask other authors why they think you're not getting any nibbles. Refine the query letter for the next batch. When you get near misses, many times you'll get boilerplate rejections, but some agents will add personal notes like, I like this aspect of your book, but not these, or I can't represent this book, but I'd love to see your next project. So take note of that response in your spreadsheet, because if you don't manage to get an agent on that book, you'll use that list again on your next project. And you might even drop that into the query letter on your next book, like you Saw my other project, you wanted to see the next one, here it is. And that information will also help you refine the list and adjust your tiers of agents for the next set of submissions. Also, if you agree with what they said, ask if they'd be willing to take another look if you edit the novel. And if they do, maybe edit it. Again, it's only if you agree, but it might give you one more chance. And they might have some really good ideas of things that could use work in your material. So maybe you want to take that on. So just ask them, and if they agree, you can make the changes and submit again. When you get requests for partials or fulls, send whatever they've requested in whatever format they require. If you're unsure of the format and file type, just ask. Is a Word doc in standard manuscript format okay? When all the agents in the current round have been accounted for and you've made the necessary changes to your query letter, begin the next round. Step 5. When you get an offer for representation, set up a phone call. Agents will often offer a phone call without you asking. If they don't, ask for one so the two of you can be properly introduced. If they refuse for some reason, that's a huge red flag to me. I probably wouldn't take things any further with that agent at this point. And if you have any agents that are considering partials or fulls, consider reaching out to them and be honest and tell them you have an offer of representation on the table, but that you'd like to talk to them about possible representation because you believe they're a better fit or something like that, whatever the case may be with that particular agent. And they may then pull your submission to the front of the pile and read it and get back to you quickly. And then you might have a choice of a couple of agents at that point. So if they agree, set up a call with them to discuss as well. Step 6. Before your call with any agent, prepare your list of questions. For example, what did you like about the book? Why do you think we're a good fit? How do you like to work with authors, generally speaking? How big is the agency and how do you work internally? Do you have junior agents or others who read manuscripts? Are some people dedicated to royalties and payments, which frees up the agent to work on the things that are important, making deals, and perhaps dealing with problems? What is the commission breakdown for domestic and foreign sales and dramatic rights? Who handles their foreign rights submissions? In my experience, having a sub-agent who specializes in foreign rights is far superior to having the same agent handle both domestic and foreign rights. What, if anything, does the manuscript need before you submit? Is it only editorial feedback? How can I help you get it ready? Which publishers and editors would you send my manuscript to? Will you be pursuing a 1, 2, or 3 book deal? What happens if this book doesn't sell? What if I don't agree with what a publisher wants to do with my book or how they're approaching publication? Will you help me navigate that? Are you open to me writing in other genres, and how would you approach that? If things don't work out, and stress that you hope that never happens, can you describe how we'd sever ties? In short, Google a list of questions for literary agents and gather yours. Here is an example. So this is a blog post that has a comprehensive list of questions to ask on the literary agent call. This stuff, it's kind of hard to do, to be honest, because you feel like they're sort of honoring you by offering representation, but you have to look at this as a business decision and you have to evaluate whether or not it's going to be a good fit for you long term. That is super duper hard to say no to, but if it really is a bad fit, if it's not a good fit, it is better to have no agent at all than a bad agent or an agent you can't work with. So you have to be honest with yourself and be pretty serious and pretty hard about this decision-making process. So again, here's the example, a comprehensive list. It has things like why me, a number of questions along those lines. Why you? Why that particular agent? The revision process, how do they handle that? How do they submit? What does the fine print look like? What is our future going to look like after this book is done? Talking about their sales records, etc., etc. So look over that kind of information and gather your list and be ready to talk about that on the phone call. Step number 7. So that was all prep work before the phone call. On the call itself, the agents are mostly predisposed to like you. So be ready to have a, relaxed but business-like conversation. I say relaxed, but I know it's really hard to be relaxed when you are this up-and-coming author and you don't yet have an agent. Maybe they're your first agent and you're gonna be nervous. I was super nervous during my call. So after introductions, just have a small chat up front to break the ice a bit and then just get into your questions. Get a feel for the communication style they have as they give their answers. And then after the call's done, evaluate if they're truly a good fit. Again, it's better to have no agent than a bad agent or an agent that's not a good fit. Step number 8. You can search for sample contracts to start to get a sense of what these things look like. SFWA, the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers Association, has sample contracts that they developed with the author interest in mind. And so here's an example, and I'll put the link up, the model agent-author agreement, and they keep updating it over time. So if we look at this PDF, it just has sample clauses that they would expect to see that take your best interests in mind in this contract. As with any contract, you should be reading that over carefully. Consider having an intellectual property lawyer who specializes in novels literature look over the agreement if you're concerned about it. Be careful with all contracts, of course. If you're okay with it, once you get comfortable, then you can sign and begin the work of submitting your project. Again, you may have some work to do for the agent so that they have the materials they need to make their submissions. And that's part of what you'll be talking about at this point. So you might make some edits, produce other deliverables like pitches or jacket copy. Agents often do that, but they might like to get your thoughts before finalizing their pitches. Okay, so that was a lot, and it was a bit stressful even for me thinking back on all I went through in the agent hunting phase, but I hope that gives you some ideas on how to identify the agents you'd like to work with, and in the end, gets you a great agent. If you have more tips on how to get an agent, I hope you'll share your thoughts in the comments below so everyone can benefit from them. As always, if you found this talk useful, I hope you'll like and share with other writers and writer groups especially. That really helps to grow the channel. I have a ton more videos I hope to tackle soon, including a deep dive into Scrivener's metadata, a how-to on self-publishing in paperback format, and more. So hit subscribe to be notified when those come out. I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, dream big, stay positive, and keep writing. Peace, everyone.